The first thing Adriana realized after the gunshot stopped was that Enzo Valentino was bleeding. Gunfire tore through the narrow street without a single second of warning. One moment the night was quiet. The soft clink of glasses, the distant murmur of traffic, the warmth of restaurant light spilling through the windows onto the wet pavement. And then the world exploded. Glass shattered in a single violent cascade. People screamed. A woman in a silver dress dropped to the ground beside an overturned chair. A waiter dove behind the hostess podium. A man in a suit grabbed his companion and pulled her flat against the wall. The chaos was total and immediate, the kind of chaos that doesn't give you time to understand what's happening before it's already happening to you. Adriana felt Dante's hand slam into her shoulder before she even heard his voice. He shoved her so hard behind the parked car that her knees cracked against the asphalt and her palms scraped open on the ground. She gasped. Another bullet struck the restaurant window directly above her head, and the glass rained down in glittering pieces across her hair, her back, the back of her hands. "Stay down," Dante barked, already moving, already drawing the weapon from beneath his jacket with the practiced efficiency of someone who had rehearsed this exact scenario more times than she could count. Her heart was hammering so violently it felt like it might crack through her ribs. She pressed flat against the car door and tried to breathe. Around her the night was still breaking apart. She could hear shouting, the squeal of tires, rapid footsteps on pavement, more shots fired somewhere down the street. The deep crack of return fire from Dante's men materializing out of what had seemed, moments ago, to be an empty sidewalk. She pressed her back against the cold metal and made herself look. Across the pavement, through the chaos of running figures and smoke-thick air, Enzo Valentino was standing. That was the first thing that struck her. Not the blood. Not yet, but the fact that he was still on his feet. Every instinct she had said he should be on the ground. The shots had been close. She had heard at least one of them connect, that different, heavier sound that she would never be able to describe accurately to someone who hadn't heard it before, but that she would never, for the rest of her life, forget. And yet there he was, back pressed against the restaurant wall, one hand braced on the doorframe, eyes scanning the street with a concentration so complete it looked almost terrifying. Not the look of a man in panic, not the look of a man in pain, but the look of a man who was still thinking, still calculating, still measuring the situation, even as it bled through his fingers. Then she saw the blood. Dark, bleeding fast, seeping through the white fabric of his shirt from somewhere below his left shoulder, expanding outward like ink pressed in a paper, moving too quickly, moving in the way that blood moves when it has decided it is done staying where it belongs. Her breath locked in her throat. Enzo Valentino, the man everyone in this city seemed to fear, the man who commanded absolute loyalty with nothing louder than a word, the man who had looked at her across a dinner table 2 hours ago like she was a problem he found genuinely interesting, had just been shot, and the men who had shot him were not finished. Another burst of fire from the far end of the street. Dante shouted something in Italian. 3 more men appeared from what seemed like nowhere. Black clothing, weapons drawn, moving with the coordinated speed of people who had been trained for exactly this, who had been waiting in the shadows of this evening all along, invisible and watchful, and now were suddenly, brutally present. The shooters broke. She heard engines, tires, the rapid shriek of a car accelerating away from the scene. Then another set of shots, Dante's men returning fire, the sound echoing off the narrow buildings, and then, gradually, the specific silence that comes after violence. The silence that feels loud, because everything before was louder. Dante was at Enzo's side in seconds. Adriana was on her feet without deciding to stand, moving across the pavement on instinct, glass crunching under her shoes, heart still hammering, but her hands already reaching. "Let me see," she said, pushing him beside Dante. "We need to move." Dante's voice was tight, stripped of everything except function. "I know. Let me see first." She didn't wait for permission. She pressed her hands against Enzo's side, against the spreading dark stain and applied pressure the way she had been taught in a first aid course she'd taken 6 years ago and never expected to use. Enzo's jaw tightened, but he made no sound. His eyes moved to her face. "I said I'm fine," he said. "You said that before I saw how much you were bleeding," she said. "So you'll forgive me if I don't take your word for it." Something moved in his expression. Not quite amusement. It was the wrong moment for amusement, but something in the vicinity of it. Something that looked almost like respect. "Car," Dante said. They moved. 2 black vehicles had appeared at the curb, as if summoned. Because they had been summoned, she realized. Dante had made calls in the seconds between the shooting stopping and the running beginning. The car doors were already open. Enzo moved under his own power, which was more than she had expected, though she noticed the way he held his arm slightly away from his body, the way each step was slightly more deliberate than it should have been. She climbed in beside him. Dante took the front. The doors closed, and the car was moving before she had fully processed that they were inside it. "Hospital," she said immediately. "No hospital." Enzo's voice had not changed. "Flat. Final. You have a bullet wound. I'm aware of what I have. Then you're aware that it needs more than pressure from my hands." "It will get more than that," he said. "Just not a hospital." She pressed harder against his side and looked at him in the dim light of the moving car. His face was pale beneath its usual composure. She could see that now, a grayness under the warm tone of his skin that hadn't been there at dinner. His jaw was set. His breathing was controlled in the deliberate way of someone managing pain rather than in the natural way of someone not feeling it. "Talk to me," she said, because she needed to keep him alert and because she could feel herself needing something to anchor to. "Tell me something." He looked at her sidelong. "What would you like to know?" "Anything. I don't care. What's your favorite city?" A pause. He seemed faintly surprised by the question, which meant it had done its job. "Naples." "Why Naples?" "Because it's loud," he said, "and chaotic, and completely, unapologetically itself. It doesn't perform for visitors. It doesn't apologize for what it is." He paused. "I find that admirable in a city." She almost smiled. Under different circumstances, with different amounts of his blood on her hands, she might have. "That sounds like a description of a person." "Most cities do," he said, "if you're paying attention." The driver said nothing. Dante spoke quietly into his phone in the front seat, clipped sentences she could only partially catch. "Location confirmed. Doctor en route. Secure the perimeter. No police contact." The car moved through streets she didn't recognize, taking turns with no apparent logic, doubling back through alleyways and side roads, and she understood that the route itself was intentional, a pattern designed to lose any tail, to make the destination illegible to anyone watching from behind. She kept her hands pressed against his wound. She watched his face. She counted his breaths. "How bad is it?" "Honestly," she asked, low enough that only he could hear. He considered the question with a seriousness she appreciated. "Painful," he said. "Not fatal." The angle was wrong for anything critical. "You sound like a man who has thought about this before." "I've thought about most things before," he said. "It's how I've survived this long." The safe house was not what she had imagined. She had built a picture in her mind of something grim and functional. A warehouse, a basement, a room smelling of mold and weaponry. What the car pulled into instead was a building on a quiet residential street, for stories, stone facade, looking for all the world like a private apartment building of the expensive variety, unremarkable in the way that only truly expensive things can be. Inside was different. The moment the car pulled into the underground garage and the doors opened, the world changed. 2 armed men appeared from positions she hadn't seen. A third moved to Enzo's side immediately, guiding him toward an elevator. A woman in her 40s with close-cropped gray hair and a medical bag over her shoulder met them at the elevator door. She looked at Enzo's wound with a brisk, unsentimental assessment of someone who had made this evaluation many times before, and she said, "Through," and led the way without any further preamble. The main floor of the safe house, if safe house was even the right word for a space that had the spare elegance of a high-end private residence, was laid out with the quiet efficiency of a command center. 3 men sat at a bank of monitors in one corner. A fourth was on a phone, speaking in rapid Italian. 2 more stood near the windows, watching the street below through a gap in the curtains. The air hummed with the focused energy of people who knew their jobs and were doing them without needing to be told. Adriana stood in the middle of it and felt the full weight of what she had stepped into. This was not a dinner date gone wrong. This was not a misunderstanding, not an ordinary bad evening that would resolve itself by morning. This was a world, complete, functioning, organized, with its own rules and hierarchies and emergencies, and she was standing in the middle of it with someone else's blood drying on her hands. Dante appeared at her elbow. "You should wash your hands," he said. "There's a bathroom through there." She looked down at her hands. She looked up at Dante. "How is he?" "Dr. Vega has handled worse," he said. "Much worse." "How long has she been his doctor?" Dante's pause was fractionally too long. 15 years. Adriana absorbed this without expression. 15 years. 15 years of patching up bullet wounds in safe houses. 15 years of this particular world, this particular set of emergencies, this particular man who commanded enough loyalty that a doctor had been on call for a decade and a half without, apparently, ever choosing to leave. She washed her hands. She stood in the small bathroom with the warm water running over her palms, and she looked at herself in the mirror, and she had a brief, clear-eyed conversation with herself about what she was going to do next. She could ask to leave. Dante would arrange it. Enzo would allow it. She was fairly certain of that, whatever else he was. She could go back to her apartment, lock the door, and spend the rest of the night convincing herself that this had been an aberration, a single extraordinary evening that had nothing to do with the ordinary shape of her life. She turned off the water. She dried her hands. She looked at her reflection one more moment. Then she walked back out into the safe house and sat down at the table in the main room to wait. Dante came and went. Men came and went. The activity of the place had a rhythm to it. Urgent, but not panicked. Purposeful in the way of people who had been trained to function in crisis the same way other people were trained to function in offices. She observed it. She mapped it. Her mind did what it always did when under stress, which was to gather information and organize it, because information was the thing that had always made her feel less helpless. The attack had been targeted. That much was obvious. The shooters had positioned themselves specifically, not random street violence, not opportunistic, but deliberate. They had known where Enzo would be. They had known when. They had arrived early enough to establish positions, which meant they'd had time to prepare, which meant the information had reached them with enough lead time to allow for operational planning. Someone had told them. She was still turning this over when Enzo appeared in the doorway. He was dressed in a clean shirt now. Someone had brought one, or there was a supply here for exactly this kind of occasion, which seemed entirely possible. His wound had been treated. He moved with more ease than before, though she could see the careful management of it in the slight stiffness of his posture. He looked at her across the room with an expression she was beginning to learn. That particular quality of attention he gave to things he found worth attending to. "You're still here," he said. "I'm still here." He crossed the room and sat at the table across from her. He said nothing for a moment, and she didn't fill the silence. And somehow that was comfortable in a way that most silences between near strangers are not. "I need to tell you something," he said finally. "All right. The attack tonight was not random," he said. "You've already worked that out, I think." "Yes. What you may not have worked out," he said, "is what it means for you." She looked at him steadily. "Tell me, everyone who was at that table tonight is now connected to this," he said. "Everyone who was seen with me, who was helped into one of my cars, who is now in one of my safe houses. The Romano family, the people who sent those shooters, they don't leave loose ends. If they believe you are important to me, you become a target regardless of your actual involvement." The words settled in the room between them. "And am I," she asked, "important to you?" The question came out more directly than she'd planned. She watched something move through his expression, something he controlled quickly, but not quite quickly enough to hide entirely. "You were at my table," he said carefully. "That is enough for them. She nodded slowly. She understood what he was and wasn't saying, and she filed both parts of it away. So I can't simply go home and pretend tonight didn't happen. Not safely. Not immediately. And you're telling me this now because you deserve to understand what you're in, he said. You didn't choose this. I don't want you to feel trapped by it without at least understanding the shape of the trap. She studied him. It was a strange thing to say for this kind of man in this kind of world. It was the kind of honesty that didn't perform itself, that simply appeared direct and uncomplicating and sat there. Dante said something earlier, she said, about the attack being too perfectly timed, about a traitor. Enzo's expression shifted subtly. Yes. Someone inside told them where you'd be. Yes. And when? Yes. How many people knew about tonight's dinner? She asked. He regarded her. Why do you ask it that way? Because the specificity matters, she said. It wasn't just your location. They knew you'd be there for dinner. They waited for it to end before moving, which means they had both the location and the schedule. That narrows the source considerably. She paused. How many people knew both? The silence that followed had a different quality than the ones before it. Dante, who had come in partway through and was standing near the far wall, was looking at her now with the expression of a man being forced to recalibrate something. Enzo said quietly, 3. Then Adriana said, you have a very short list. Dante pulled up a chair. He set his phone on the table between them. He looked at Enzo, got a slight nod, and looked back at her. Walk us through your thinking, he said. And she did. She laid it out the way she would have laid out a compliance case, methodically, without rushing, building the structure of it from first principles. The timing of the attack. The positioning of the shooters, which implied lead time of at least 40 minutes. The fact that the window of the attack opened precisely when the dinner ended. The logical conclusion that whoever provided the information had known not just the location, but the occasion. Not simply Enzo's whereabouts, but the specific event around which his evening was organized. Dante listened without interrupting. Enzo listened the same way he did everything, with a quality of focus that made her feel like every word was being weighed and kept. When she finished, neither of them spoke for a moment. Then Enzo said, you work in financial crime compliance. Yes. You spend your days tracing criminal networks through financial data, through transaction records, shell company structures, and communication patterns, mostly. And this, he said, gesturing slightly to indicate the situation around them, looks like a version of what you do professionally. It looks like a version of what any investigation looks like, she said. The principles are the same regardless of the industry. He looked at her for a long moment. May I see my phone? He said to Dante. Dante handed it over. Enzo scrolled for a moment, then passed it to Adriana. Look through the messages from today. Tell me if anything catches your attention. She took the phone. She scrolled slowly. Dante. Ferrara. Someone named Giulio. A driver. Standard logistics. Check-ins. Confirmations. She kept scrolling. Then she stopped. The message was simple. Casual. Exactly the kind of thing that a busy man receiving hundreds of messages daily would register briefly and move past. Dinner with Adriana tonight? 7 words. A question mark. The kind of light, almost conversational tone that bypassed scrutiny the way things sometimes do when they're designed to. She looked at the sender name. She felt something cold move through her. Who is Marcus? She asked. Enzo frowned. I don't know Marcus. This message is from a contact saved as Marcus. He took the phone. He looked at it. She watched the slight furrow appear between his brows. That contact isn't mine, he said. I don't have a contact by that name. She looked at Dante. Dante looked at the phone. Someone added it, Dante said, or inserted it remotely, Adriana said. Both men looked at her. It's possible to add contacts to a device through a clone SIM or through certain spyware applications. If someone had access to this phone, physically or digitally, for even a few minutes, they could plant a contact, Dante finished, and send a message from it that would route back to a real number, she said. A real number that would then be traceable. If anyone looked, to a source the Romanos control. She paused. The message itself is almost incidental. It's a timestamp. It confirmed the dinner was happening tonight, in real time, to whoever was waiting for confirmation. The room had gone very quiet around them. "Trace the number," Enzo said to Dante. His voice hadn't risen. It hadn't needed to. There was something in the evenness of it that was, in its way, more significant than anger. Dante took the phone and moved to the far side of the room. Adriana watched him, watched the way he typed quickly and with purpose, watched the way his posture tightened incrementally as the results came back. She already had a feeling. She had been carrying it since she first read the sender name. Since her brain had made the connection it had been trying not to make for several minutes now, since the shape of the thing had started becoming visible through the noise. She was hoping she was wrong. Dante came back to the table. He sat down. He looked at the phone in his hand with the expression of a man who wished he were delivering different news. The number, he said, was routed through a relay network, encrypted point to point. But the originating device, the actual phone the message came from, he stopped. He looked at Adriana. "I need to ask you a question." "Ask it." "Do you know Adriana Hayes?" The name arrived like a stone thrown into still water. She felt the ripple of it move through her before she could stop it, felt it in the sudden tightness of her chest, felt it in the way her hands went absolutely still in her lap. She said, "She's my sister." Nobody spoke. The room held its breath. Dante looked at the table. He looked at Enzo. He looked back at Adriana with the careful, almost pained expression of someone who had, over the years, delivered a great deal of bad news and had never found a way to make it land softly. "The number the message was routed through," he said. "It's registered to a Sienna Hayes. Same address as a man named Marcus Delgado." The architecture of it went up all at once, like watching a building constructed in fast forward, each piece connecting to the next until the structure was suddenly, undeniably complete, standing in front of her, requiring nothing further to understand. Marcus, Sienna, the same address. Of course. And now the Romano family. Adriana stood up. She needed to be on her feet. She walked to the window, curtains still drawn, and pressed her palm flat against the wall and breathed, slowly, deliberately, using the technique she had developed over years of managing the specific exhaustion of being someone who felt things too completely in situations that required complete composure. "My sister," she said, more to herself than to either of them. Enzo had not moved. Dante had not moved. They waited. She turned around. "Tell me everything you know," she said. "Not a summary. Everything. If you haven't subscribed yet, this is the moment. Hit subscribe right now and turn on notifications, because part 3 of this story is going to shake everything you think you know about every character in this story." Dante spread his hands on the table. He pulled up the intelligence report on his tablet and walked her through it with the same methodical clarity she had used earlier, which she appreciated. He was returning the respect she had shown him. Sienna Hayes, 31 years old, seen twice in the past 3 weeks in company with men identified as members of the Romano organization. Once at a restaurant on the east side of the city where the Romano family conducted informal business. Once at a private event at a venue the family used for internal meetings, not a social venue, not somewhere you ended up accidentally. She had not been alone on either occasion. She had been with Marcus Delgado, whose import-export business had been, Dante explained with the careful neutrality of someone delivering information they know will damage, a front for Romano money laundering for approximately 2 years. 2 years. Adriana sat very still and did the math without meaning to. Marcus had opened the import business 26 months ago. She had still been with him then. She had made dinner to celebrate the opening of his business. She remembered the wine. She remembered how excited he had been. She remembered thinking that things were finally moving in the right direction for them, that the years of financial stress were easing, that the future was opening up in the way that futures sometimes do when you've been patient enough. While she had been making that dinner, he had been laundering money for a crime family. Adriana. Enzo's voice was quiet, not gentle. Exactly. He wasn't a gentleman, or at least he didn't present as one, but careful in a way that landed with more warmth than gentleness sometimes does. She looked at him. "What do you need?" he asked. It was such a direct question. No management, no softening, no performance of comfort. Just the question. What do you need? As if it were simple. As if the answer were something she could simply identify and request. She thought about it honestly. "I need to know the truth," she said. "All of it, however bad it is." "All right. And I need to know what you're going to do about it." "That," he said, "depends on what we find." She nodded. She sat back down. She folded her hands on the table and looked at Dante. "What else?" Dante glanced at his tablet. Sienna's direct involvement is unclear. She may have been used as a conduit without full knowledge of what she was facilitating. Marcus is the primary connection, but she's been present at 2 Romano-adjacent events, and her phone number was used in a coordinated attack. Whether she understood the purpose of the message, Adriana said, is somewhat beside the point at this stage. She was in rooms she shouldn't have been in. She was with people she shouldn't have been with. And her phone was used to nearly get a man killed tonight. She paused. "My sister doesn't do anything accidentally. She makes choices and then acts surprised by their consequences." Enzo was watching her. She could feel the weight of his attention like a hand on her shoulder. Present, steady, not demanding anything. "That's a hard thing to say about your sister," he said. "It's a true thing," she said. "Hard and true are not the same, though they sometimes travel together." Something crossed his face. "No," he said quietly. "They don't." The night was deepening outside. Inside the safe house, the work continued. Quiet, purposeful, relentless. Adriana sat at the table with the tablet Dante had given her access to, and she began to do what she did best. She traced. She followed the threads. She pulled at the edges of the Romano financial network the way you pull at a loose thread on a sweater. Carefully, patiently, not stopping when it resists. Marcus Delgado's import business was registered under a shell company whose parent entity was a holding company in a jurisdiction she recognized immediately. A common pass-through for organized crime financial operations. The pattern was not sophisticated. It was competent, functional, designed to survive casual scrutiny rather than serious investigation. She could see the shape of it within the first hour. She made notes. She cross-referenced. She pulled transaction histories through the access Dante had given her to 3 separate databases that she chose not to ask too many questions about. At some point, Enzo sat down across from her again. He had coffee, 2 cups, one of which he placed in front of her without comment. She took it without comment. They sat in a companionable silence that should have felt strange and did not. "How did you get into compliance?" he asked after a while. She looked up. "My father had a business partner who stole from him for 6 years," she said. "By the time anyone caught it, the damage was done. The business folded. My father never quite recovered." She paused. "I decided I wanted to be the person who catches things like that, before the damage is done." He was quiet for a moment. "And do you?" "Catch things." "Usually," she said. "Not always early enough." He looked at her with the expression she was coming to think of as his real face. Not the face he used in public, not the composed, unreadable mask, but the one underneath it, where something more complicated lived. "Your sister," he said. "When did it start to go wrong between you?" She hadn't expected the question. She sat with it for a moment. "She's 3 years younger than me," she said. "She was the one everyone noticed. I was the one who was capable." She said it without self-pity. It was simply accurate, the way certain facts are simply accurate. For a long time I thought that was fine, that those were 2 different kinds of value, that being capable was its own reward. "Was it?" "Mostly," she said, "until she took the one thing that was supposed to be mine." He held her gaze. "And yet you still call it her cruelty rather than his." Adriana considered this. "Marcus made a choice," she said. "Ivet grivet Marcus." He wasn't a good person, and I didn't fully see that until I had to. But Sienna is my sister. That carries a different kind of damage. It goes deeper. It reorders things. She paused. "Does that make sense to someone who didn't grow up with siblings?" I had a brother, he said quietly. She waited. He died when I was 23, he said. So I understand the specific weight of blood. He looked down at the coffee cup. And I understand that it doesn't stop being heavy just because the person who carries it has done something terrible. They sat with that for a moment. I'm sorry, she said. About your brother. It was a long time ago, he said, which wasn't the same as saying it no longer mattered, and they both knew it. Dante returned at just past midnight with a new expression on his face. The look of a man who has pulled a thread and found it attached to something much larger than expected. He sat at the table. He set the tablet down between them. He looked at Enzo first, then at Adriana, and she noticed that the second look lingered slightly longer, as if he were still deciding how much to include her. Enzo noticed too. She stays, he said, without inflection. Dante absorbed this and moved on. The Romano family's financial activity over the past 60 days, he said. 3 major cash transfers rerouted through new channels. 2 shell entities dissolved and replaced with fresh registrations in new jurisdictions. A complete restructuring of their import logistics network. He looked at Adriana. You've already seen some of this. Most of it, she said. The restructuring is the part one keep coming back to. They're not cleaning house for the sake of cleanliness. They're preparing for something. The port contracts, Dante said. She nodded. I found a trail on those about an hour ago. 3 Eastern port contracts coming up for tender in the next 30 to 45 days. If the Romano family secures all 3, they gain control of approximately 60% of the city's maritime logistics capacity. She laid it out on the table between them, the way she would have laid it out in a conference room for a client. That's not just business advantage. That's leverage. That's the ability to control what moves when it moves and at what cost. Combined with their existing street-level operation, it would shift the balance of power in this city in a way that couldn't easily be undone. Enzo was very still. How close are they? Close, she said. The financial restructuring suggests they're positioning to move within weeks, not months. And the attack tonight wasn't an assassination attempt. She paused, making sure she had both of them. It was a test. The room went very quiet. Think about the timing, she said. The shooters left before your men arrived. For minutes before. That's not a coincidence. They were measuring your response window. They wanted to know exactly how fast your security operation can mobilize, what the gap looks like, where the exposure is. She spread her hands. They weren't trying to kill you tonight, Enzo. They were timing you, getting the data they needed to plan the real operation. Dante looked at Enzo. Enzo looked at Adriana. How do you know this? He said, and it was not quite a question, more like a statement that was asking to be confirmed. Because this is exactly how it works in financial crime, she said. Before a major operation, before the big move, you run a probe. Something small enough to be plausibly deniable. Something that lets you gather intelligence without fully committing. The real play comes after, when they know exactly what they're walking into. She looked at him directly. They now know your response window is between 3 and 5 minutes. They know your security rotation, at least partially. They know your communication protocols because someone inside gave them that. And they have confirmation of your schedule because they tested it tonight. She let that sit. They're not going to wait 30 days. They're going to move soon. Maybe 2 weeks. Maybe less. The silence that followed was different from the ones before it. Heavier. Charged with the particular weight of a situation that has become more serious than anyone in the room had realized before this moment. The leak, Dante said. He looked at Enzo. We need to close it before they move. Yes, Enzo said. We've narrowed it to 2 people, Dante said. Based on who had full access to tonight's schedule, the security rotation, and the dinner location. A driver named Soto, and a man named Caruso who handles communications. Evidence. Circumstantial, Dante said. Strong patterns, but nothing definitive. We can't move on either of them without more. Adriana had been listening. She had been running the problem in parallel, the way she always did when she was working, the background processor of her mind chewing through the structure of it while the foreground conversation continued. She looked at Dante. "You need a canary trap." He stared at her. "How do you know what a canary trap is?" "I've used them," she said, "in financial investigations. You give each potential leak a different piece of misinformation, small enough that it doesn't damage you if it spreads, specific enough that when it reaches the target you can identify the source." She looked at Enzo. "In this case, you give Soto and Caruso different versions of false information about your plans for one of the port contracts. Whichever version reaches the Romano family tells you who the leak is." The two men looked at each other. Something passed between them, a brief, wordless negotiation, and then Enzo said, "Can you design it?" "Yes," she said, "but I'll need to understand enough about the port contracts to make the false information plausible. Implausible bait doesn't catch anything." "Dante will brief you," Enzo said. Dante sat back in his chair with the expression of a man who had come into this evening expecting a fairly ordinary crisis and had instead been repeatedly surprised by the woman sitting across from him. He appeared to be making his peace with it. "When did you learn all this?" he asked. 7 years of investigating people who thought they were smarter than the systems designed to catch them," she said. "You learn to think the way they think." "And which way is that?" "Like someone who assumes no one is paying close enough attention," she said. "The Romans made a version of that mistake tonight. They assumed the woman at the table was decorative. They used her sister's phone because they thought it would go unnoticed. They timed the attack around a dinner because they assumed a social occasion would be a blind spot." She paused. "People who underestimate often leave the clearest trails." Dante almost smiled. It was brief and carefully controlled, but it was there. "I'll get you the files on the port contracts," he said. He left. Adriana and Enzo were alone again. The safe house had settled into its nighttime rhythm, quieter but no less watchful. She could hear the low murmur of the men on monitor duty. She could hear occasional footsteps in the hall. Outside, somewhere, the city was continuing its business, entirely unaware. "You've decided to stay," Enzo said. It was not a question. "I made that decision when I stayed in the car instead of asking Dante to take me home," she said. "I'm choosing to acknowledge it now." He looked at her. Why? She had thought about this answer. She gave him the real one. "Because for the first time in a long time, I'm in a situation where what I know actually matters. Where the things I'm good at are the things that are needed." She paused. "I've spent years being competent in environments where competence was expected and unremarkable. Tonight, someone used my sister's phone to coordinate an attack on a man I had dinner with. And the best tool available for figuring out what's happening and stopping what comes next is the part of my brain I use every day at work. That's clarifying." He was quiet for a moment. "That's a very practical reason to stay in the middle of a war. I also," she said, more quietly, "want to know the truth about Sienna. I want to see it clearly. Not from a distance, not managed and softened by other people. I want to know exactly what she did and why and how much she knew." She met his eyes. "And I want to be in the room when she has to account for it." Something in Enzo's expression shifted. It was subtle, the kind of shift you can only see if you've been watching carefully, which she had been. Not surprise. More like the recognition of something he'd been looking for without being sure it existed. "All right," he said. "Then let's make sure we have everything we need before that room happens." The canary trap took 3 hours to build properly. She worked on it with Dante through the small hours of the morning, designing 2 versions of the same false information, specific enough to be believable, different enough in their details that the version that surfaced would be unmistakable. Version 1 placed Enzo's interest in the Northern Port contract, suggesting a deal already in preliminary negotiation with a specific logistics firm. Version 2 placed the same interest in the Southern contract with different numbers, a different counterparty, a different timeline. Each version would be delivered casually, mentioned in passing, embedded in routine communications, the kind of thing that registers as offhand rather than significant. Soto would receive version 1. Caruso would receive version 2. Whichever version reached the Romano family would close the case. "You're good at this," Dante said, around 2 in the morning, reviewing her work. "You said that before," she said. "I mean it more now," he said. And something in the way he said it suggested it was not a compliment he gave easily. By 3 in the morning, the trap was set. The false information had been introduced into the appropriate channels. There was nothing to do now but wait and watch, and be ready for what the waiting would bring. Adriana sat back in her chair. The adrenaline of the evening was finally, incrementally, loosening its grip. She was tired in the way that goes deeper than sleep, the kind of tired that lives in the bones and behind the eyes and at the back of the throat. Enzo appeared at the doorway. He looked at her for a moment. "Come with me," he said. He led her through the safe house to a room at the back. Not the medical room, not one of the operational spaces, but something that looked almost like a sitting room. A couch, a window with curtains drawn, a low lamp. He sat on the couch. She sat at the other end of it, and for a while neither of them said anything at all. "My brother," he said eventually, unprompted, "was the one who was supposed to run all this. Not me." She looked at him. He was older, better suited, my father thought. More patient, better with people in the way that I was not when I was young. He paused. "I was the one who was too blunt, too direct. I said things I shouldn't say. I moved when I should have waited. My father used to tell me I would get myself killed before I was 30. "What happened?" she asked. "My brother died," he said, "and I didn't. So everything that was meant to be his became mine, and I had to become someone who could carry it." He looked at the window, the covered window, the darkness behind the curtains. "I spent years learning to be patient, learning to wait when every instinct said to move, learning to see the full picture before reacting to any part of it. Did it work? Well enough," he said. "I'm still here." A pause, though tonight was closer than I would have preferred. She almost laughed. She contained it, but he heard it anyway, and the corner of his mouth moved. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "You've been asking things all evening. Why stop? The person inside your organization who leaked. When you find out who it is, what happens?" He met her eyes directly. "That depends on why they did it. And if the why isn't sufficient, then it is the end of things for them in this world," he said. Not a threat, not a performance. Just a fact, delivered with the flatness of something that was simply true. She held his gaze. She understood him, and she didn't look away. "And Sienna?" "That," he said, "I will not decide without you." She was quiet for a moment. She hadn't expected that either. She seemed to keep not expecting him. "Why?" "Because she wronged you first," he said, "long before tonight. And whatever she is, whatever she's become, you are the one who carries the weight of that. It belongs to you." She looked at her hands in her lap. She thought about Sienna's face, the specific face she'd had the night Adriana had found out about Marcus. Not ashamed, not even particularly apologetic, just already moving on to the next version of the story, the version where it wasn't quite as bad as it looked, where there were circumstances where everyone involved had some responsibility. "I want the truth," Adriana said, "before I decide anything. The complete truth." "Then we get you the complete truth," he said. They sat in the quiet of the room for a while longer. The safe house continued its watchful, sleepless activity around them. At some point, Adriana became aware that she was not entirely sure when she had last felt this particular kind of stillness in someone else's company. The kind that doesn't require filling, that doesn't ask anything of you, that simply exists and lets you exist inside it. She thought about her apartment, her ordinary, careful life, the routine she had built to protect herself from exactly the kind of disruption this evening represented. The gym in the mornings, the careful diet, the colleagues she liked but didn't quite trust, the dates she went on and left early from because none of them had ever made her feel like staying. She thought about the moment she had walked into that restaurant and looked across the room and seen a man sitting alone at a corner table with a quality of attention that suggested he saw everything in the room and found most of it adequately interesting and nothing of it remarkable until she had come through the door. She thought about how she had known, even then, that this was going to be complicated. She just hadn't anticipated the specific nature of the complication. "Get some sleep," Enzo said, standing. "Will you?" He almost smiled. Eventually, he left. She lay back against the cushions of the couch, and she did not exactly sleep, but she rested, which was almost the same thing, and outside the covered windows the city moved through the last dark hours before morning. Dawn arrived not as a single moment, but as a gradual accumulation of light around the edges of the covered windows, a slow brightening that the safe house acknowledged only indirectly through the change in the quality of sound. The city waking up outside, traffic building, the distant sound of voices somewhere on the street below. Adriana woke before anyone told her to. She sat up, straightened herself, and spent 30 seconds just listening to the building around her. Activity. The specific kind of focused activity that meant something was happening. She went to find Dante. He was in the main room with two men she hadn't seen before, standing over the monitor bank, all three of them looking at the same screen with the compressed attention of people watching something develop in real time. He looked up when she came in. His expression told her immediately. "The trap worked," she said. "Version 2, he said. "The Southern Contract. Caruso's version." She absorbed this without letting the full weight of it settle yet. "When did it surface?" "About 40 minutes ago," Dante said. "Romano intelligence picked up a communication referencing the Southern Contract, Enzo's specific timeline, and the counterparty we invented. It's word for word from version 2. He paused. "Caruso. 16 years with Enzo. Communications director. Access to everything." She sat down. "Does Enzo know?" "I'm telling him in 10 minutes, Dante said. "When I have the confirmation locked down completely. I won't bring him a maybe on this." "Smart," she said. Dante looked at her for a moment. "You designed the trap well," he said. The false details were credible enough that he passed them without checking. If they'd been too obviously false, he would have suspected it was a test and sat on the information, she said. "Yes, the plausibility is the mechanism. The false information has to look like a real leak is worth making." Dante nodded. He turned back to the monitors. She watched his reflection in the dark edge of the screen for a moment. The jaw set, the eyes careful, the expression of a man who has spent his life managing the fallout from other people's betrayals and has never quite found a way to stop being affected by them. 16 years, she said quietly. 16 years, he confirmed. She understood what that meant in this world. 16 years of absolute access. 16 years of being trusted with the architecture of a man's life, his schedule, his communications, his vulnerabilities. 16 years, and somewhere along the way Caruso had decided to sell it. "Why do people do it?" she asked. Not rhetorically. She genuinely wanted to know what Dante thought. He was quiet for a moment. "The same reasons they always do," he said. "Money, fear, resentment, some combination. Caruso's wife has been sick for 2 years. Expensive treatment. The Romano family has a habit of finding people's pressure points." He paused. "It doesn't excuse it, but explains it." "And Enzo?" she asked. "Will he consider that?" Dante looked at her steadily. "He'll consider everything," he said. "He always does. But consideration and forgiveness are not the same thing. Not in this world." She nodded. She understood that. She sat and waited. Enzo came out of the back room 20 minutes later. He had clearly not slept. She could see it in the lines around his eyes, the particular stillness of a man who had been awake thinking rather than resting. But he was composed, dressed, carrying himself with the same authority he had carried since she first met him, as if the wound in his side were simply a detail he had decided not to give the significance of a detail. He looked at Dante first. Dante handed him the tablet. He read it. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Bring him in." 2 words, utterly even, and the room moved. Adriana watched 2 men leave. She watched Dante coordinate the operation with the clipped efficiency she had seen all night. She sat at the table, and she worked on the Romano financial analysis while the machinery of consequences turned around her, and she thought about how strange it was to be this calm inside something this large. Caruso arrived at the safe house 40 minutes later. She was in the back room, not hiding exactly, but removed from the initial confrontation by unspoken agreement. She could hear voices through the door. Not words at first, just a pattern of voices. Then gradually words. Caruso's voice, defensive, climbing, shifting from denial to explanation in the way that guilt always moves when the evidence is already on the table. Dante's voice, flat, patient, asking questions he already knew the answers to. Enzo's voice, and here was the thing that struck her most. Enzo said almost nothing. He spoke perhaps 5 sentences over the course of an hour of conversation. Each one landed like a stone dropped into deep water. Each one required no follow-up, generated no argument, produced no defense that held. The authority of absolute certainty in a room is its own kind of silence. Then there was a long quiet. Then Dante came and opened the backroom door. He's talking, he said, about the Romano operation, the port contract plan, the timeline. He looked at her. And about Sienna. She stood up. What about Sienna? Dante chose his words carefully. Caruso is the one who identified her as a useful conduit, he said. Her connection to Marcus made her a channel. Caruso told the Romano family about her. She was recruited specifically because of her connection to you. The room tilted slightly. She steadied herself against it. They recruited her to get to me? To get to the dinner, Dante said. They needed confirmation. They knew about your relationship with Enzo. Early, before it even fully was a relationship. Someone was watching him. They knew about the dinner invitation. But they needed real-time confirmation that it was happening, that he would be there at that time. They used Sienna because of her access to Marcus, because Marcus had some access to your life, because through that chain they could get the confirmation they needed. She sat back down. Does Sienna know what she was used for? That, Dante said, is the question. She looked at the door. I want to talk to her. That's not something we can arrange tonight. I'm not asking you to arrest her, Adriana said. I'm asking you to let me call her. On a clean line, nothing she can trace. I want to hear her voice. I want to hear what she says when I ask her directly. Dante looked at the closed door where Enzo and Caruso were. Let me ask, he said. She sat and waited. She thought about Sienna. She thought about the particular quality of her sister's voice on the phone. That light, careless music of it. The voice of a woman who had learned early that her charm was its own kind of currency and had spent her whole life cashing it. She thought about whether that voice would sound different now, whether she would be able to hear, beneath it, whatever shape the truth was wearing. Enzo came out of the other room. He looked at her. She looked back at him. You want to call her? He said. Yes. Why? Because I need to know if she knew what she was part of, Adriana said. Not for your investigation. For me. I need to know if she did it deliberately. He was quiet for a moment. Then he crossed to the table and sat across from her. What difference does it make? To you practically? All the difference, she said. If she was used without full knowledge, she's careless and easily manipulated, and that is a kind of tragedy that belongs to her. If she knew what she was part of, if she knew her phone was being used to time an attack on a man I cared about, then she chose it. And I need to know which one she is before I decide what she is to me. Enzo looked at her for a long time. Use the secured line in the back, he said. Dante will set it up. The call took 8 minutes to arrange and 6 minutes to complete. She sat in a small room with a phone and Dante's brief instruction. Untraceable both ways, no location data. And she dialed a number she had memorized so long ago it lived in her hands rather than her memory. Sienna answered on the second ring. Adriana. Her voice was sleepy, slightly surprised. 3 in the morning, city time. Hi, Adriana said. A pause. The kind of pause that people who are hiding things leave when they're deciding which version of themselves to present. This is a weird time to call. I know, Adriana said. I'm sorry for waking you. She wasn't, but she said it because she needed Sienna to relax. I've been thinking about us. About the situation with Marcus. Another pause. Softer this time. Sienna exhaled slowly. Adriana, I'm not calling to fight, she said. I'm calling because I've been thinking about whether I can let go of it. Whether we can get back to something. She kept her voice even. Warm even. The voice of a woman who was considering forgiveness. I've been talking to someone, actually, someone I met recently. It's made me think about what I want going forward. Oh, Sienna's voice changed. Something interested entered it. Who? His name is Enzo, she said. I met him through work. We had dinner tonight. The silence on the other end lasted exactly 2 seconds. She counted them. That's nice, Sienna said. But the warmth in her voice had thinned slightly. Something underneath had stiffened. You don't know him, Adriana said. It was not a question. No, Sienna said. Why would I? I don't know, Adriana said. I just thought, the circles people move in are smaller than you think sometimes. You and Marcus move in business circles. Not as kind of business I can imagine, Sienna said, and there was something in the way she said it. Something too careful. The wrong kind of careful. Not the careful of someone navigating a sensitive topic with a sibling, but the careful of someone who knows more than they're supposed to and is managing how much of that knowing to show. Adriana heard it. It landed in her chest like something cold. What kind of business do you think he's in? She asked, keeping her voice light. I don't know, Sienna said, too quickly. I just meant, you know. Sienna. She paused. She kept her voice level with everything she had. Did someone ask you to get information about who I was seeing? The silence on the other end was 3 seconds. 4. That's a strange question, Sienna said. It's a direct question, Adriana said. You can give me a direct answer. Another silence. Then, I don't know what you're talking about. It was the voice Sienna used when she was lying. Adriana had known that voice since they were children. The slight elevation of pitch, the precision of each word, the over-articulation of someone managing their breath. She had heard it 100 times. She had believed it many of those times because she had needed to, because she had loved her sister and had chosen the version of events her sister offered over the version her own instincts were giving her. She was not choosing that version tonight. Okay, she said quietly. Okay, Sienna. Adriana, what is this about? Nothing, she said. I'll talk to you soon. She ended the call. She sat in the small room with the quiet phone in her hand, and she breathed. She allowed herself 30 seconds of the full feeling of it, the grief of it, the specific grief of understanding something you had been half understanding for years and had finally let yourself understand completely. Sienna had known. Not everything, perhaps. Not the attack, not the specifics. But she had known enough. She had provided enough. And she had done it knowing it was something she was not supposed to do. She set the phone down. She stood up. She walked back out into the main room. Enzo was standing near the window. He looked at her when she came in. He didn't ask. She knew, Adriana said. He said nothing. He simply held her gaze with the patient, steady attention of someone who would wait as long as it took. Not everything, she said, but enough. She was asked to gather information about who I was seeing, and she did it. She knew that what she was providing was going to people who would use it for something. She paused. She didn't ask what that something was because she didn't want to know. Enzo was quiet for a moment. That's a choice, he said. Yes, she said. It is. She crossed to the table. She sat down. She looked at her hands on the tabletop, these hands that had been pressing against a bullet wound a few hours ago. These hands that had been tracing criminal financial networks and designing intelligence traps and were now, she realized, completely steady. What do you want to do? Enzo asked. He had asked her this before, earlier, and she had needed time then. She did not need time now. I want Sienna to be removed from whatever she's connected to, she said. Whatever her role in the Romano network is, I want her extracted from it. Not arrested, not destroyed, but out. Completely. She looked up, and I want Marcus dealt with through whatever channels are appropriate for what he's actually done, which is significantly more than betraying me personally. Enzo nodded slowly. And your relationship with your sister? Adriana thought about this for a long moment. She thought about the phone call. She thought about the 2 seconds of silence before Sienna said, "That's nice." She thought about all the years of being the capable one while her sister was the noticed one, all the years of being the one who held things together while her sister did whatever she liked and relied on her charm to manage the fallout. I don't know yet, she said. I'm going to need more time to know that. She looked at him. Is that an acceptable answer? It's an honest one, he said. It was the best review available, she thought. It was enough. If this story is keeping you on the edge of your seat, drop a comment below. Tell me what you think Sienna was really thinking. And if you want part 3 the moment it drops, subscribe and hit the bell. This is the chapter that changes everything. Dante came in from the operations corridor with the energy of a man carrying new information. Not the exhausted carrying of bad news, but the quickened pace of someone who has uncovered something significant and is moving to deliver it. He set the tablet on the table between them. Caruso has been fully cooperative, he said. In exchange for, he glanced at Enzo, in exchange for considerations he's been offered. He looked back at Adriana. The Romano family's operational plan for the port contracts is not what we thought. What do you mean? Enzo said. It's not just the port contracts, Dante said. That was the visible piece. The piece they wanted us to see if we were looking. The actual plan is behind it. He pointed to the tablet. They've been acquiring controlling positions in 4 city council members' investment portfolios over the past 18 months. Indirect acquisition. Through holding companies, through intermediaries, nothing traceable through any single transaction. But the aggregate position gives them effective financial leverage over 4 votes on the Municipal Contracts Committee. The room was very still, which means, Adriana said slowly, they don't need to win the port contracts competitively. They just need to vote to go their way. Yes, Dante said. And the port contracts are the cover story, she said. The thing that gets attention. The thing that makes anyone watching, including your intelligence operation, look at the wrong board while the real move happens somewhere else. They've been planning this for 18 months, Dante said. She was already pulling the thread. The city council vote. When is it? Dante looked at his tablet. 9 days. Enzo stood up. He moved to the window. The curtain window. The window that looked out over the street he couldn't see. And he stood there with his hands clasped behind his back, and she could see, from the line of his shoulders, the calculation happening. They needed to neutralize me before the vote, he said, without turning, talking through the logic of it. Not kill me necessarily. Destabilize. Create enough chaos within my operation, the attack, the mole, the internal suspicion, that we couldn't mount a coherent response in time. He turned. And use my personal situation, he looked at Adriana. Use the dinner. Use the connection to you. Use your sister. Create enough noise in my personal and professional life simultaneously that the 9 days pass before I can. It's a distraction, Adriana said. All of it. The attack, Caruso, even Sienna. They're all designed to keep you looking inward for 9 days. Dante looked at both of them. We have 9 days to surface the council member leverage before the vote. And we have the financial trail, Adriana said. She was already thinking through it. The holding company acquisitions. If they've been building this for 18 months, they've left a trail whether they know it or not. Financial restructuring of this scale always leaves traces. And I know exactly what to look for. She looked at Enzo. He looked at her. Then, he said, we have work to do. They worked through the remainder of the night and into the morning. Adriana led the financial analysis, pulling threads through 3 layers of shell company structure, identifying the holding companies, tracing the beneficial ownership through a maze of jurisdictions that would have been impenetrable to anyone who hadn't spent years learning to read this specific kind of complexity. Dante coordinated with 2 people outside the safe house whose identities she didn't ask about and who apparently had access to financial intelligence databases she recognized as government grade. By 7 in the morning, the structure was visible. She had laid it out across the table in the kind of systematic map she would have prepared for a regulatory submission. Clear, documented, traceable from evidence to conclusion without a gap. For council members, 12 holding companies, 18 months of carefully staged acquisitions. Total exposure per council member, between 6 and 14% of their personal investment portfolio tied to entities the Romano family controlled. Not enough to destroy them. Exactly enough to own them. This is prosecutable, she said, looking at the map. Everything here is prosecutable. The acquisitions were done through legitimate channels. That was the sophistication of it. But the beneficial ownership structure constitutes an undisclosed conflict of interest on every vote those council members have participated in for the past year. And the aggregate effect of those votes, she traced the lines, can be demonstrated as coordinated manipulation of the municipal contracting process. Dante was looking at the map with the expression of a man seeing something he had spent a long time trying to find. How long would it take you to document this properly? In a form that could be submitted? For regulatory submission? 3 days if I have continued access to these databases. For a more immediate audience? She understood what he was asking. 12 hours, she said. A summary that tells the story clearly to someone who needs to act on it quickly. Dante looked at Enzo. Enzo was looking at Adriana with something in his expression that she had not seen in it before. Not the watchful attention, not the careful reserve, but something that lived underneath both of those. Something open, almost. Start on the 12-hour summary, he said. She started. At 9 in the morning, Dante's phone buzzed. He looked at it. He went still. He looked at Enzo. The Romano family sent a communication through an intermediary channel, he said. His voice had the quality of controlled evenness that she was beginning to recognize as Dante's version of alarm. They're requesting a sit-down. When? 3 days from now. Neutral ground. A venue they've proposed. Terms. Dante paused. He looked at Adriana. She felt the back of her neck prickle. They've named a condition for the meeting, Dante said. They want Adriana present. The silence in the room was absolute. Enzo turned slowly. He looked at her with an expression that carried, for the first time, something that looked unmistakably like concern. Not managed concern. Not calculated concern. The real thing. They know, he said. They know I've been here all night, she said, and her voice was remarkably steady, which surprised her. They know what I've been doing. Caruso was their source for operational intelligence. But Caruso was only here until a few hours ago, which means they have another source inside this building. She looked at Dante, or they've been watching from outside. Dante was already on his phone. The second possibility is more likely, Enzo said. They couldn't have placed another source inside this building tonight. The safe house location isn't known to anyone who wasn't already here. He paused. They've been watching from outside, long enough to know you arrived, long enough to run your identity and understand your professional background. He looked at her steadily. They want you at the table because they've worked out that you're the one who built the trap that caught Caruso. And possibly because they've worked out that you're the one building the financial case. They want to assess how dangerous I am, she said. And possibly to make an offer, he said. The Romano family is not without pragmatism. Someone with your skills, someone who can build the kind of map you built overnight, is something they would consider an asset worth acquiring rather than an obstacle worth eliminating. She sat with this for a moment. The idea of it, the calculation behind it. You think they'd try to recruit me? I think they'd try to understand you first, he said, and then decide. She looked at the map on the table. The 12-hour summary, she was halfway through. She looked at the work, at what the work represented. 9 days for council members, 18 months of planning about to come apart in the light. Do you want to go? He asked. She looked at him. Do you? I want to know what they know and what they intend, he said. A sit-down gives me that. It also gives me the opportunity to make clear that the operation they've spent 18 months building has been surfaced and documented and can be submitted to the appropriate regulatory and law enforcement bodies within 48 hours. You'd use me as leverage, she said. Not accusatory, just identifying the mechanics. You would use yourself as leverage, he corrected. There's a difference. You would walk into that room as yourself, as someone who has, through her own skill and judgment, build a case that represents a significant threat to their entire operation. That's not a pawn. That's a player. She thought about this. She thought about every version of her life that had led to this table, this map, this moment. The father's ruined business. The 7 years of financial crime compliance. The lunch with a colleague who'd mentioned, offhandedly, a client who needed a dinner companion for an important business occasion. The restaurant with the corner table, and the man who had looked at her like she was a problem, he found genuinely interesting. She thought about Sienna, about Marcus, about all the ways she had been overlooked and underestimated and moved around the board by other people who assumed she was decorative. She was done being decorative. "Tell them yes," she said. Enzo looked at her for one long, steady moment. She held his gaze. Then he looked at Dante. "Tell them yes." Dante moved to make the call, and in the quiet that followed, in the safe house with its monitors and its watchful men and its maps on the table, Adriana Hayes understood something with perfect, terrible clarity. She had come to this city thinking she knew the shape of her life. She had come to that restaurant thinking she was having dinner. She had come to this table thinking she was helping. She was not wrong about any of those things. But she had also become something she hadn't planned on becoming. Someone in the center of a war that had been building for 18 months. Someone holding evidence that could change the outcome of a municipal election. Someone the most dangerous family in the city had just requested by name for a sit-down meeting. She had not chosen this world, but she had chosen to stay in it. And she had chosen to use every tool she had while she was in it. And those choices had made her visible in a way that could not be undone. The war had already begun. The board had been set by other people, over months she had not known about, in rooms she had never entered. But she was on the board now, and she intended to play. She looked down at the map on the table. She picked up the pen. She got back to work. Outside, across the city, the sun was fully up. The streets were filling. The ordinary business of ordinary people was beginning its ordinary day. Unaware that in a safe house they didn't know existed, a woman they had never heard of was documenting the kind of evidence that has a tendency to end things. In a very comfortable apartment on the east side of the city, a woman named Sienna Hayes was probably making coffee, probably scrolling through her phone, probably managing the low-level discomfort of a phone call she hadn't expected and answers she hadn't been prepared to give. And in a room she didn't know she was in yet, 3 days from now, Adriana was going to sit across a table from the people who had tried to kill the man she was falling for, who had used her sister as a weapon against her, who had built a shadow architecture under the city for a year and a half and called it business. And she was going to be the most dangerous person in that room. Not because of a weapon, not because of a threat, because she had done the work. And the work was already done. The morning moved through the safe house in its deliberate way, and Adriana worked. She was good at shutting out noise when the work required it. It was one of the skills she had never had to practice consciously. It had always been there, a kind of internal door that closed cleanly when she needed it to, leaving her in a space where the work was the only thing. Her colleagues at the firm had noticed it over the years, had commented on it with a mixture of admiration and mild unease, as if the capacity to be completely present in a problem was slightly uncanny in a person who was otherwise normal enough. She was in that space now. The map grew. The summary built itself sentence by sentence, paragraph by paragraph, the case assembling with the clean inevitability of something that was always true and is now simply visible. She was aware of Enzo in her peripheral attention. The way you become aware of certain presences not through effort, but through some basic, undeniable attentiveness of the body. He moved through the safe house. He spoke with Dante. He reviewed communications. He sat for 20 minutes in the back room with Caruso, and she could hear nothing from those 20 minutes except the shape of a conversation she did not want to interrupt. When he came out, he looked at her work over her shoulder without speaking. She was aware of him close behind her, close enough that she could feel the slight warmth of him, and she kept working. "This is extraordinary," he said, after a moment. "It's thorough," she said. "Extraordinary is when it changes the outcome. It will change the outcome. We'll see," she said. But she believed him. He pulled up the chair beside her and sat down. Not across from her this time, beside her, looking at the same map she was looking at. "Tell me what you see," he said. She told him. She walked him through it the way she would walk a client through a regulatory briefing. The structure of it, the key nodes, the legal vulnerabilities, the places where the evidence was strongest, and the places where it would require supplementary documentation. She was thorough and she was precise, and he listened the way he did everything, with the complete attention of someone who intends to use what they hear. When she finished, he said, "How did you learn to see structure this clearly?" She thought about the honest answer. "Necessity," she said. "When I started in compliance, I was 24 and the only woman in a team of 7. My work had to be impeccable because anything less than impeccable was going to be attributed to incompetence rather than error. So I became meticulous." She paused, and then I realized I actually loved it. The finding, the unwinding, the moment when something that looked like noise becomes a pattern. She looked at the map. "I like knowing the true shape of things, even when the true shape is ugly. Especially then," he said, and there was something in his voice that suggested he understood this from personal experience. "Especially then," she agreed. He was quiet for a moment. She felt the quality of his attention shift slightly, away from the work, toward her. "I want to tell you something," he said. She looked at him. He was looking at the table, and she noticed, for the first time, that this, whatever this directness was, required something from him that the rest of it hadn't. The shooting had not required it. The betrayal had not required it. The strategic conversation, the investigation, the trap, none of it had required this particular thing. "When I invited you to dinner," he said, "it was practical. I needed a companion for an evening that was professionally sensitive. Your name was given to me by someone I trust. I had no particular expectation of it." She waited. "I spent the first 30 minutes of that dinner revising my expectations," he said. "By the time the first course was cleared, I was already aware that you were not what I had prepared for." She held very still. "What had you prepared for?" "Someone pleasant," he said. "Someone easy to sit with for an evening. Someone who would make the occasion more manageable." He looked at her. "Not someone who would argue with my assessment of the maritime regulatory framework and be right." She almost laughed. She let herself this time, briefly. "That was a bad assessment." "It was a deliberately bad assessment," he said. "I wanted to see what you would do with it." She stared at him. "You were testing me." "I test everyone," he said. "It's a habit that has kept me alive." He paused. "You were the first person in a very long time who called it out in real time." She sat with this for a moment. The deliberateness of it, the specific kind of intelligence it represented. Not the intelligence of information or strategy, but the intelligence of paying attention to people, of reading what they reveal when they think they're simply being themselves. "And now?" she asked. He looked at her for a long moment. The expression was the one she had been trying to name all night, the one underneath the composed surface, the real one. "Now," he said, "I find that the practical invitation has become something considerably more complicated." She held his gaze. She was aware of the weight of the moment, not its danger, not its uncertainty, but its weight, the specific gravity of something that matters. "Complicated how?" she said. "In the way that things become complicated," he said, "when you realize you don't want them to end." He paused. "I have spent 15 years building a world where I am not easily surprised. Tonight you surprised me more times than I can count." That is, he stopped. He seemed to be choosing the word with unusual care. "Rare," he said finally. She looked at the map between them, the case she had built, the evidence she had assembled, the work that had come from her own mind, in a night she had not planned, in a situation she had not chosen, beside a man she had not expected. "I surprised myself tonight," she said quietly. "I have spent years being careful, being contained, building a life I could control the edges of." She paused. "Tonight, I did the opposite of all of that. And it felt," she looked for the word, "correct," she said. "It felt correct in a way that my careful, contained life rarely has." He was very still. "I'm not saying I know what this is," she added, because she believed in precision. "I'm saying I know that I'm not ready for it to end." "Then it doesn't end," he said. There was no drama in it. No performance, just the statement, clear and clean and final in the way of things that are decided rather than hoped for. She nodded once. She turned back to the work. He stayed beside her. They worked together through the late morning. Him reviewing the intelligence reports Dante, brought at regular intervals, her completing the financial summary, both of them building toward the 9 days that still remained, the vote that still loomed, the sit-down that was 3 days away, and that both of them understood would be the most consequential meeting either of them had sat in for a very long time. At 11, Dante came in with lunch he'd had brought from somewhere she didn't ask about, and she ate without fully registering what she was eating, which was the eating of someone whose mind was elsewhere. Enzo ate with the deliberate attention he gave everything, even sandwiches, which she found quietly amusing. "You eat like you're studying it," she said. "Everything is worth studying if you're paying attention," he said. "Including sandwiches?" "Including sandwiches." He looked at her sideways. "You eat like someone who has been told food is functional and has believed it." She opened her mouth to protest this and then closed it again because it was accurate. "I grew up in a house where meals were a logistical problem," she said. "My mother cooked for 8 people on a budget that was built for 6. You learned to eat what was in front of you without commenting on it. 8 people. My parents. Me. Sienna. For cousins who lived with us for 3 years while their parents sorted out a situation that never quite got sorted." She paused. "It was a loud house." "That sounds like Naples," he said. She looked at him. Something warm moved through her chest. "In some ways," she said. "Yes." He smiled. Not the controlled, partial expression she had seen before. A full smile, brief and genuine, the kind that changes a person's face completely. She held it in her attention like something she wanted to keep. Then Dante came back in, and the smile was gone, and the work resumed. By early afternoon, the summary was complete. She reviewed it twice, once for accuracy, once for clarity, and then she pushed it across the table to Enzo. He read it without speaking. She watched his face while he read it, watching for the places where his expression shifted, learning what made him react and what he processed without visible response. He was more readable than he intended to be, she thought, if you paid the right kind of attention. Most people were. When he finished, he set it down. He looked at her. 9 days, he said. 9 days, she confirmed. With this documentation and the original database records, the disclosure to the appropriate regulatory bodies takes 48 hours. They could potentially delay the vote, pending investigation. But the more direct route is to surface it to the council members themselves, he said. Directly, let them understand what's sitting on their balance sheets and who it belongs to. Leverage against the leverage, she said. Yes, they won't all fold, he said. They won't all need to, she said. You need 3 of the 4 to break with the Romano position. 2 of them have smaller exposure. I've flagged them in the summary. They're the most likely to prefer disclosure over exposure. He nodded. He looked at the summary again. This changes the sit-down, he said. Yes. They're expecting to come to the table with leverage, he said. They spent 18 months building it. They're going to walk in believing they hold the position. And instead, she said, they're going to sit down across from someone who has already mapped the position and is prepared to dismantle it. She paused. That changes the dynamic considerably. It changes what they'll do when they realize it, he said. His voice had a note in it she hadn't heard before. Not concern, but a specific, calibrated caution. The Romano family does not respond well to being outmaneuvered. Especially not in a room they walked into thinking they held the advantage. She understood what he was saying. You think it could become dangerous. I think any room where the Romano family is embarrassed has the potential to become dangerous, he said. And I think you sitting in that room is a variable I had not anticipated when I agreed to the sit-down. She looked at him steadily. You're rethinking whether I should be there. I'm weighing it, he said. Then weigh it with my input, she said. I'm the one who built the case. I'm the one who traced the financial structure. I'm the only person in your organization who can answer questions about the documentation in real time if they challenge it. She paused. And I'm the one they named. If I don't show, they know something has shifted before the meeting even begins. You lose the element of surprise. He said nothing for a moment. I understand the risk, she said. I'm not dismissing it. I'm saying the risk of my absence is higher than the risk of my presence. He looked at her for a long time. You're right, he said. I know. The corner of his mouth moved. He looked away. He looked back. 3 days, he said. In 3 days, we walk into that room. Together, she said. Together, he confirmed. That afternoon, the safe house received 2 pieces of intelligence that Dante brought in separately, 20 minutes apart, with the look of someone managing his own reactions to information before delivering it. The first, Adriana Hayes had, according to surveillance placed on her apartment building at Enzo's instruction, met with 2 men that morning who were identified as mid-level Romano associates. The meeting had lasted 40 minutes. At the end of it, she had appeared agitated. She had paced her apartment for 30 minutes, made 3 calls, 1 to Marcus, 2 to numbers Dante was still tracing, and then left the building again. She was not unaware then. Whatever she had known before, she knew more now. The Romano family was consolidating. They were pulling in their loose ends before the sit-down. Adriana received this information without visible reaction. She held it, filed it, continued working. The second piece of intelligence. Marcus Delgado had not come home the previous night. His apartment showed no activity. His car was still in the building garage. His phone was going to voicemail. The Romano family is cutting loose anyone who knows too much, Dante said. His voice was neutral. His eyes were not. Adriana thought about Marcus. She thought about 2 years of her life. She thought about dinner to celebrate the business opening. She thought about the fact that she had loved him in the uncomplicated way you love someone when you are not yet fully aware of what you love them for presence, for familiarity, for the comfortable assumption that someone is who they appear to be. She felt something for him that she did not have a clean name for. Not grief, exactly. Not pity, though pity was somewhere in it. The specific sadness of understanding that someone you cared about was, in the end, small enough to be used and discarded by people with no regard for anything except their own operation. Find him if you can, she said to Dante. Dante looked at Enzo. Enzo gave the slight nod. Well, look, Dante said, whether they would find him, and in what condition, if they did, was a question nobody in the room gave voice to. Some questions have answers that are better not anticipated. The afternoon deepened. The work deepened with it. At 4 o'clock, Adriana sat back from the table and looked at the window with its drawn curtains and thought about air. She thought about the last time she had been outside. Yesterday evening, before the restaurant, before everything. Walking 2 blocks from her apartment to the cab she'd called, the early autumn cool on her face, the city noise familiar and ordinary around her. It felt like a different person's life. You need air, Enzo said from across the room. He had been watching her, she realized. He had been watching her for a while. The curtains are drawn. The roof is secured, he said. Dante will go with you. She looked at him. You're not coming? In a few minutes, he said. I have one more call. The roof was flat and clean and offered a view of the city that was wider than she expected. Rooftops stepping down toward the river in the middle distance. The late afternoon light going golden across everything. The city below moving with the ordinary urgency of 4 o'clock on a weekday. She stood at the edge of the roof barrier and breathed the air and looked at the city and thought about the fact that none of the people down there, none of them, in their cars and on their phones and in their offices and their shops, knew about any of what had happened in the last 12 hours. They were living in the city as it appeared to be. She was living in the city as it was. She thought about whether that would always be true now. Whether she was standing on a line she had crossed and couldn't uncross. She thought, maybe the line had always been there, and she had simply not known where it was. Enzo came up behind her. She didn't turn. He stood beside her and looked at the city the way she was looking at it. And for a while they were just 2 people on a rooftop in the late afternoon, which was almost entirely unlike what they actually were. Can I ask you something? She said. Always, he said. Do you ever want to leave it? She asked. All of this. The weight of it. He was quiet for a long time. She thought he might not answer. Every man who builds something large enough to require this much protection, he said finally, eventually asks himself whether the protection has become the thing, whether what you're defending is still worth what defending it costs. He paused. I ask myself that question regularly. The honest answer changes depending on the year. And this year, he looked at her. This year, he said, the honest answer is beginning to be complicated by variables I did not have last year. She held his gaze. She understood what he meant, and she did not make him say more plainly, because some things are more true when they are not fully spoken. They stood on the roof until the light shifted and Dante appeared at the rooftop door and said, quietly, that there was something they needed to see. Back inside. Back to the table. Back to the work. There was always more work. The new intelligence was about the sit-down venue. The Romano family had proposed a private club on the north side of the city, a restaurant in its public facing, a meeting space in its actual function, a venue that Dante identified as technically neutral but practically Romano-adjacent. 3 exits, a ground floor and a mezzanine. Private parking, the kind of space designed to look like a reasonable choice while actually providing significant structural advantage to whoever knew the building better. Adriana looked at the floor plan Dante had pulled. She looked at the sightlines. She thought about it the way she would think about a negotiation, what the space communicated about the intended dynamic, what the structural advantage was meant to imply, whether accepting the venue meant accepting the subtext. Counteroffer a different venue, she said. Both men looked at her. If we accept their venue without question, we've already conceded something, she said. We've communicated that we're willing to meet on their terms. For a meeting where we're bringing a case they don't know about yet, the venue should be neutral in fact, not just in name. She paused, somewhere that neither party knows better than the other. Equal disadvantage is functionally neutral. Dante looked at Enzo. She's right, he said. She usually is, Enzo said, and there was something in his voice that was dry and warm simultaneously, which she was beginning to understand was his version of affection. They agreed on a counteroffer venue. The Romano family would accept or they wouldn't. Either response would be informative. By evening, the summary was final. The Canary Trap had yielded its result, and Caruso was in a situation she chose not to think too hard about. The port contract financial map was complete, the council member exposure documentation was ready, and Adriana was sitting at the table with cold coffee and the specific exhaustion of someone who has run on adrenaline for 18 hours and is beginning to feel the edge of the cliff. Enzo sat across from her. Go sleep, he said. In a minute. Now, he said, not unkindly. The way you say a thing when you mean it. She looked at him. Are you going to tell me I did well? She asked, and it came out slightly more vulnerable than she had intended, the edge of the tiredness showing in it. He looked at her for a moment with the expression she had been learning all night, the real one, underneath everything. You did more than well, he said. You changed the shape of the next 9 days. You changed the shape of the sit-down. You changed the shape of what is possible. He paused. I don't say that easily. She nodded. She believed him, which was the thing about honesty that was uncanny when you encountered it. You could feel it land differently than other things. It had no performance in it. It just sat there, taking up exactly as much space as it needed. Thank you, she said, for not making me leave. Thank you, he said, for not leaving. She went to sleep in a room at the back of the safe house, on a bed that was better than it had any right to be in a room that felt, in its spare quiet, more like rest than anything had in a long time. She slept for 4 hours. She dreamed about the map. When she woke, the safe house was in the specific kind of motion that meant news had arrived while she slept. She could hear it before she had fully come awake. The changed quality of voices, the faster footsteps, the compressed urgency that ran through the building like a current. She dressed. She went to the main room. Dante was on the phone. 2 men she recognized from the monitor station were standing in the middle of the room with the expression of people who have just been told something they are still processing. Enzo was at the table, looking at his phone with an expression she had not seen on him before. What is it? She said. Dante ended his call. He looked at her. He looked at Enzo. He set the phone on the table with the careful movement of someone managing their own hands. The Romano family accepted the alternative venue, he said. Good, she said. That means There's more, Dante said. She stopped. They sent a second communication with the acceptance, he said. An addendum. She waited. They've identified your professional background, Dante said. Your work history, your specific expertise, your published regulatory submissions from the last 3 years. They know exactly what you're capable of and approximately what you've been doing since last night. He paused. They revised their condition for the meeting. She felt the cold move through her. What's the revised condition? Dante looked at the tablet. He looked at her steadily. They want you to come to the table without the documentation, without the financial case, on a promise that what you've built stays out of official channels, pending the outcome of the sit-down. The room was very quiet. They know, she said slowly, about the council members, about the financial map. They know enough to know they need to stop it, Dante said. And they believe that putting it in the room as a negotiation point gives them control over it. She looked at Enzo. He was looking at her. She understood the shape of it. The Romano family had understood what she represented. They had responded the way any sophisticated operation responds to an unexpected threat, not with force, not immediately, but with an attempt to contain it, to bring it to a table where they could manage it, to turn the weapon into a bargaining chip. What they did not understand, what they had in all their sophistication still managed to miscalculate, was that the documentation was not a weapon in her possession. It was already in motion, because Adriana had sent a preliminary copy to a regulatory contact she trusted before midnight, before the canary trap had sprung, before any of this had become as large as it had become, quietly as insurance. The kind of move that compliance professionals make when they've found something that has a way of disappearing if you're not careful. She had learned that lesson at 24, when a case she'd built had been walked back through back channels before it could reach the light. She had never allowed that to happen again. The documentation was already somewhere the Romano family could not reach. She looked at Enzo. Something moved in his expression, a question. She said, "Tell them we'll come to the table." He waited. "And tell them," she said, "that the documentation question will be discussed at the table." She paused, letting the precision of it land. Not before. Enzo looked at her for one long moment. Then the corner of his mouth moved. "Dante," he said, "eyes still on Adriana. Send the response." The war had been building for 18 months. The board had been set by people who assumed they were the only ones watching. And in 3 days, Adriana Hayes was going to walk into a room with the most dangerous family in the city, beside a man who had been shot 12 hours ago and was behaving as if it were a minor inconvenience, carrying a case that could end an 18-month operation and the political leverage it had produced. And she was going to sit down at a table and find out exactly what people who had underestimated her were willing to do when they finally, fully understood their mistake. She was not afraid. She was ready. And that, she thought, was the clearest evidence of how much this night had changed her. She picked up the pen. She went back to work. If you made it to the end of part 2, you already know nothing in this story is what it looks like. Drop a comment telling me, do you trust Enzo completely? Or is there something you're still watching? Like this video if Adriana's last move gave you chills. And subscribe right now, because part 3 opens inside that sit-down room, and I promise you, nobody in that room, including Adriana, is fully prepared for what happens next. The story is just beginning. Don't miss a second of it.